Today we're going to start using a new process to solve quadratic equations called completing the square. Completing the square utilizes something that's called a perfect square trinomial. So we're going to look at those first before we actually talk about the process. You'll see these three trinomials here. These are actually perfect square trinomials because they all work out in a similar manner. So if I were to go ahead and factor this first trinomial, the x squared plus 6x plus 9, the 9 is going to go on the top of my x, the 6 is going to go on the bottom. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 9 and add up to 6. That would be 3 times 3. So since I can go right to my parentheses here, instead of using AC split, I know I have x plus 3 times x plus 3. Remember, anytime you have something times itself, you could rewrite that as something squared. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one, in the top of my x I have a 25, in the bottom I have a negative 10. So the two numbers that multiply to give me 25 and add up to negative 10 are negative 5 and negative 5. Again, I can go right to my parentheses. I have x minus 5 times x minus 5. And since it's the same thing twice, I can rewrite it as x minus 5 squared. The third one should also work out the same way. Top of my x would be a 49. The bottom should be a 14. So the two numbers that multiply to give me 49 and add up to 14 are 7 and 7. So when I go to write this out, I have x plus 7 times x plus 7, which is the same as x plus 7 squared. So notice when I factored all three of these, the reason they're perfect square trinomials is because when I factor them, I end up having the square, the parentheses squared, on the outside. We're going to use this when we complete the square, and that's kind of our goal for completing the square. Okay, so the process of completing the square is rewriting the equation in order to use a perfect square trinomial to solve the equation. There is a formula that you need to know. We are going to take half of b and square it. So let's look at this first problem. We have an equation here, or an expression, a x squared plus bx, and then there's not a number here for c. So when we're completing the square, we're actually trying to figure out what number we need to put there so that it factors nicely. And that's where this formula comes in. B over 2 and then squared. So in this problem, my b is 6. We're going to go ahead and divide that by 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. Make sure you put that 3 in parentheses, especially when you have negatives there, otherwise it'll mess up your answer. And then 3 squared is 9. So that means if I put a 9 there, I have x squared plus 6x plus 9. This is my perfect square trinomial. The second step here says to factor each trinomial. So if I go ahead and make my x, my 9 goes on the top, my 6 goes on the bottom, so the two numbers that multiply to give me 9 and add up to 6 are 3 and 3. Since they're same, I'm going to go right to the step. X plus 3. X plus 3 squared. This is my final factored answer. Let's try the second one. Again, we're trying to find the c, and we're going to use a and b here. Actually, we're just going to use b. So we're going to take half of b, which is negative 8. So negative 8 divided by 2, which gives us negative 4. Negative 4 squared is actually positive 16. Make sure you put that negative 4 in parentheses when you type it in your calculator, otherwise it will mess up your answer. So our trinomial here is x squared minus 8x plus 16. And if we were to factor this, 16 would go on the top of the x, negative 8 would go on the bottom. So the two numbers that multiply to give us 16 and add up to negative 8 are negative 4 and negative 4. So since they're the same, I can go right to this group, x minus 4, and square it, because I have the same thing twice. One thing I want you to notice that will save you some time so that you don't have to do this part, we're trying to skip this, is that when you complete the square, the number that ends up in our parentheses, so this plus 3 and this minus 4, already showed up in our problem somewhere. Notice that's the same as what we got when we took half of b. Okay, so when you factor, if you wanted to go quickly, after you figure out what your c is, to go from your trinomial to your answer, your factored form, that number that goes in the parentheses is going to always be half of b, if you do this correctly. Okay, let's actually go ahead and look at the whole process now. So the first step in this process is to make sure that you have the x squared and the x on the left side of the equation and the constant or the number on the right side. After that, you're going to complete the square and add that number to both sides of the equation. Common mistake is that students will add it to the left side, but not to the right. Then you're going to factor the left side into a perfect square trinomial and simplify the right side. And then we're going to go ahead and solve the equation using square roots and not forgetting the plus or minus sign, and then isolating the variable. Okay, so we're going to do two problems together, and then you are going to go try two on your own. Okay, so first step is to take this constant term here and move it to the other side. Okay, so we're going to do minus 19 on both sides. Okay, pretty easy first step. When I do that, I like to add something extra in there. So I have x squared plus 20x plus, and I'm going to figure something else out there, I'm not sure what it is yet, equals negative 19 plus that same thing. Okay, I like to do it this way because then I remember that I need to add the number to both sides when I complete the square. Okay, so completing the square for step 2 is going to use that formula b over 2 squared. So in this problem, we have a is 1, a is 1, b is 20, we're figuring out c. So we're going to do 20 divided by 2 and then squared. So 20 divided by 2 is 10, and 10 squared is 100. That is the number that is going to go in the blanks in my previous step. Okay, so this is step 2. Put it in both blanks. Okay. For step 3, we're going to go ahead and factor the left side. And when you're factoring, nice shortcut, is this number that we got here when we divided by 2 is what's going to go in our parentheses. So we're going to have x, and that's a positive 10, and then squared. And then on the right side, we have to simplify this, so negative 19 plus 100 gives us 81. Okay, so that's our third step. And then our very last step is to go ahead and solve by taking square roots of both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and take the square root of the left side and the square root of the right side. These two cancel each other out and leave us with x plus 10. The square root of 81 is 9, but don't forget that plus or minus sign. So we have x plus 10 equals positive 9 or negative 9. There are a couple ways you can approach this next part. I'm going to go ahead and subtract 10 from both sides. What this is telling me to do is to find two answers. Notice I have that plus or minus 9, so that means I have a positive 9 and a negative 9, and then I'm going to subtract 10 from both of those. Okay, so I'm going to get two answers here. So for the first part, 9 minus 10 is negative 1. Negative 9 minus 10 is negative 19. So my answers are going to be negative 1 and negative 19. Okay, let's do one more together. Same idea. We're going to move our constant over so that we have x squared plus 20x plus something equals 73 plus something. And then we're going to use our b to complete the square. So we're going to take 20 divided by 2, which is 10, and then square it. So that means I'm going to add 100 to both sides. Okay. Then we are going to take and factor the left side. We will have an x plus 10 in parentheses because that's what I got when I divided by 2 here. equals 73 plus 100 is 173. Go ahead and solve by taking square roots of both sides. This time you'll notice we don't know the square root of 173 off the top of our head, so we're going to go ahead and plug that into our calculator and take the square root of 173, and we are going to round to the thousandths. So I have x plus 10 equals positive or negative 13.153. So I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides. I'm going to find two different answers. So I'm going to do positive 13 minus 10. And I'm going to do negative 13.153 minus 10. So that gives me my two answers. For the first one, I get 3.153. And for the second one, I get negative 23.153. Okay, and that's all you're doing. Go ahead and pause, ask any questions that you might have, get some help if you're not understanding something. Try the guided practice problems and have them checked just to make sure you're on the right path. And once you finish that, you can do the homework and check that before taking the quiz to move on. Have a great day.